we will get started. So there is no doubt whatsoever that high levels of pollution will kill people. And this was shown very dramatically in the Great Smog of London, which happened in 1952. It was just 4 days in which London was just covered with this horrible smoke due to a weather inversion and the fact that there was such high use of coal. And during those 4 days, it was estimated that 4,000 people died. It was mostly from respiratory tract infections. Now, this is from a 1952 paper, and this shows the deaths per day. So you see that during this horrible event, many people died. And this shows the increase in sulfur and smoke. And papers wouldn't call it smoke today, we would call it particulate matter, but this is a 1952 paper. So what I want you to note is that after this event, the death rates were still higher. And our current estimate of how many people died as a result of that is 12,000. So as a result of this, Britain passed their Clean Air Act in 1956. So that was about 15 years before we passed our Clean Air Act. So just some statistics from the World Health Organization estimate that worldwide outdoor air pollution contributes to about 7.6% of all deaths. Now I'm gonna talk about, how air pollution will cause somebody to have a heart attack, to have pneumonia, et cetera. It's not that it's the only factor. These people had other factors leading to their death. But what we're saying is that air pollution played a role, was one of many factors that resulted in their death. And worldwide, 4.2 million deaths were attributed to outdoor air pollution. And in the US, it was approximately, this is covered up on my screen, but on the US, it's approximately 70,000 a year. It's a lot of people. The World Health Organization has some statistics as far as deaths per 100,000 people that could be attributed to air pollution. And not surprising, India and China were very, very high. What surprised me was Ukraine. This was from 2016, so this was before the war. Their power plants burn a lot of coal. That's basically why. Compared to other countries, we're not that bad. But what I found by doing this research, and this is a literature search, I've never done original research in this area, but from all the reading that I've done, what we're finding is that low levels of pollution are killing people as well. So even though we may be better than other countries, we're not where we need to be. So as far as how does this is an outline of some of the disorders that have been clearly linked in a causal way with air pollution. So first of all-cause mortality. Now, of course, mortality is 100%, but what we're talking about is mortality in a given period of time. And that is increased by high levels of air pollution. As far as the types of disorders, we all think of lung disorders when we think of air pollution. I mean, when we are in a polluted area, we have trouble breathing, we can feel it physically, but that's not what kills most people who die in part due to air pollution. is cardiovascular diseases. And that was the big surprise for me when I started this. I had was aware that air pollution affected the cardiovascular system because I'd done some summer research at UAB and I saw posters about it on the wall. So I was aware of that. But the fact that most people who die from air pollution die, or the majority die from cardiovascular disorders, that was new to me. Cancer, of course, lung cancer, but other cancers as well. And newer research is showing neurologic disorders are affected. And I'll go into more detail about this later. So this is the combined of outdoor and household air pollution. We don't have the problem with household air pollution that other areas of the world do, where they use fuel inside their home that creates, for cooking, that creates pollutants. But so this is combined, it's 7 million. And you see 34% from ischemic heart disease, that's like heart attacks, 20% from stroke, added up, 54% from cardiovascular disorders. Now, the EPA, as part of the Clean Air Act, has designated some criteria pollutants. And for these pollutants, they have national ambient air quality standards. And this includes nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide is mostly from road traffic. And the problem with nitrogen dioxide mostly has to do with the lungs. So asthma, lung inflammation, bronchitis. Sulfur dioxide is more from burning fossil fuels, like in a power plant or some industry. Again, a lot of lung problems from that. Ozone, I'm going to talk a little bit about the on the next slide. Particulate matter, that's really what I'm focused on as far as the reading that I've done. And that's what causes the problems with the cardiovascular system. Lead and carbon monoxide are also pollutants that have national ambient air quality standards for them, but that's not part of my research. So as far as ozone, you know, ozone that's way up there is good for us, right? It protects us from UV light. Ozone that is near the ground is bad. It's not, there's no industry that directly releases ozone. Basically, the way it works is the industries release pollutants, mostly, the pollutants would be the volatile organic compounds. And when I use the word organic, all I mean is that it has carbon in it. It doesn't mean it's good. It's not, in this case, they're definitely not good. So sunlight reacts with these pollutants and ozone is created near the ground. And one of the worst things about it is that it aggravates asthma, and there is research that suggests that it can cause asthma. And it will also aggravate chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is emphysema and chronic bronchitis. And it also makes the lungs more susceptible to infection. It causes lung damage. Now, most of the talk today will focus on particulate matter. And these are particulate matter. Another name for it is soot, S-O-O-T. It's basically solid and liquid droplets, and it's formed both from road traffic and fuel combustion. And from the World Health Organization, quote, major components are sulfate, nitrate, ammonia, sodium chloride, that's just salt, black carbon, water. And it's a mixture of solid and liquid particles of organic, and that would include those volatile organic compounds I talked about, and inorganic substances suspended in the air. Now, one of the area is that the particulate matter in one place is different from the particulate matter in another place. So we want to, so the research can be problematic. What we'd like to know is what part of the particulate matter is causing the problem. As far as the health effects, particulate matter is what causes the problems with our cardiovascular system. But it also is associated with respiratory disease and with cancer. When I was at UCLA, one of our people in our lab, his wife had lung cancer and she had smoked. So in Los Angeles, and fortunately Los Angeles is a little better now than it was then, but it can be an important factor when it comes to lung cancer. So when we talk about particulate matter, there's several types. Basically, we classify it according to size. And just to give you some perspective, this shows that fine beach sand is about 90 micrometers. One thing that's measured is all particulate particles below 10 micrometers. So it's, 1/9 of this. But what is of real interest when particulate matter 2.5? And that's because being smaller, this would include everything less 2.5 and less. Because it's smaller, it penetrates deeper into the lungs. If it's small enough, it can go directly into the blood, we think. It's more likely to include some of these really toxic substances. Now, the worst of all is ultrafine, but we don't have as much data on that because it's very difficult to study. So I mentioned the criteria air pollutants, and again, there's 6 of them. And my focus today is more on particulate matter. There is an index, an air quality index that the EPA publishes, and to find out what it is every day, you can go to this website, airnow.gov. And I went this morning. And I think we'll all be happy to know that in the Birmingham area, we were below this value of 101, and it's classified today as good. But I think especially for people who have pre-existing disorders, it would be good to check this every day, because when it's not good, we need to know it and take precautions. Oh my goodness, I thought that I had switched this so everybody could see what I want you to see. So I'm just going to have to tell you what it is.
I think we can see it, Marion.
Oh, good. I think, okay, good.
Screen.
Good. So the EPA puts out primary standards for these criteria pollutants, and those are ones that are designed to protect human health. There's also secondary standards that have to do with welfare, what value is needed to protect agriculture, climate, et cetera. Now, what I want to call your attention to is this one, the primary standard 2.5, which at the current time is 12 micrograms per cubic meter. And that is important to keep in mind, because that is likely to, I think, hopefully will change. But the EPA will be looking at that this summer. And the reason they'll be looking at it this summer is because a lot of the data that is coming out is showing that particulate matter 2.5 causes bad effects at levels much lower than this 12 microgram per cubic meter that is the standard now. I was looking on the World Health Organization just to kind of check a few things this morning, and their standard now is 5. So that's much lower. And I would say in general, as in looking at this research, while it was clear in the 50s that high levels of air as more and more research is happening, we're finding that lower and lower amounts will cause harm. Now, what this a study that Dominici and coworkers did, and what it shows is that at levels over, well, first of all, let me explain this. This is the hazard ratio. And what they looked at in the study was the number of deaths that to the level of pollution in that area. And to do this study, they had data from Medicare. So we're talking about millions of participants in this study. So this is data from millions of people. And the hazard ratio, when it is over 1, and this is over 1, these confidence levels, it says that it's having an effect, a bad effect that is statistically significant. And so it's comparing, the ratio compares how many deaths do they have in this period of time in areas that are more polluted compared to the deaths in areas that are less polluted. And this just shows it's a straight line when it comes to practically, when it comes to particulate. The case with some of the other pollutants, they'll be more flat and then they go up. So the result of all of this is the EPA plans to make a proposal this summer regarding this standard. They looked at it during the Trump administration and decided not to change the standard. They're going to look at it again, and there are plans for public comment. So I definitely will be giving them my 2 cents. Now, one of the things that people who want to pollute will say is that all these studies are just association. They don't mean that it causes something. And let's face it, who cares if it's associated? We want to know if it's causal, if air pollution is causing the health effects that we see. And there are guidelines that epidemiologists, whether a factor is causal. So I want to go over those. These are known as the Bradford Hill criteria. You don't have to have all of them to say it's caused, but with air pollution and health, most of them fit. So air pollution comes first, then the health effects. So it satisfies temporality. Air pollution effects are analogous to smoking, so it fits there. When you look at the effects in different populations, you see. And with regard to air pollution and health, we have a lot of data that shows how it causes the problem. What is the mechanism by which it is damaging our body? And that says that it's plausible. You don't have to know the mechanism in order to say something is causal, but it should make sense. Coherence has to do with the fact that the animal studies fit with the population studies, fit with biomarkers that all the types of investigations fit together. Now, this one does not fit. With particulate matter 2.5 is not a specific effect. So this one isn't satisfied. Biological gradient, as pollution goes up, the effects go up. Experimental evidence, you have to be careful with, there's only you can't ethically do certain experiments on humans. But there's a lot of animal experimentation that fits with the human data. And there are some experiments that you can ethically do with humans that support these health issues. Its strength is another one that's not satisfied. Air pollution may cause a 10% increase in risk or a 20% increase in risk. It's nothing like the risk with smoking. I mean, smoking is like 5-fold, 6-fold increase in risks. So it's not strong. On the other hand, if it is what makes the difference between someone having a heart attack or not, it doesn't matter if it only contributed 10% of the risk. So most people who've looked at this area will say, yes, these air pollution is causing these problems. So how does it cause disease? Well, first of all, it causes oxidative stress. And oxidative stress just means that free radical molecules that are very reactive with components in our body, our lipids, which are fatty-like molecules, our proteins, our DNA, reactive oxygen species and reactive nitrogen species, they will react with those molecules and cause damage. And so that's what we mean by oxidative stress. We have mechanisms to get rid of the free radicals, but with oxidative stress, those methods are inadequate. Now, oxidative stress causes chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation will cause oxidative stress. And the other thing I want to mention while this slide's up here is one of the molecules that is damaged by free radicals and reactive species is DNA. So some of the damage that air pollutants do to our body is due to DNA damage. So inflammation, anytime there's an itis, it involves inflammation. And if it's acute, it's helpful. That's why our body does this. It helps with the healing process. But if it's chronic, it's not. And most chronic diseases have some amount of inflammation. So by causing inflammation, air pollution causes a whole host of problems. That's why it's not specific. And there's a lot on this slide, but what I want to point out is here's the particulate matter here. It causes oxidative stress. Oxidative stress will cause inflammation. Inflammation causes oxidative. We have a vicious cycle going on. Okay, let's talk now about a little bit more about the specific disorders. And I think particularly because I've never done original research in this field, when I started doing my literature search, I relied heavily on the experts. So I looked for papers that were joint statements by researchers who were doing original research in this area. So one is from a statement by the European Respiratory Society and American Thoracic Society, their joint statement. And the thing about this is they're going to be, because they have to get a consensus, if anything, they're going to be a little conservative in saying what air pollution has caused. I mentioned lung cancer, asthma, COPD. It'll make cystic fibrosis worse. I mean, certainly people have cystic fibrosis because of a gene they've inherited, but it'll make it worse. I want to call your attention to respiratory infections. Of course, this is what caused so many people to die during the Great Smog of London. It will increase the likelihood and the severity of respiratory infections. What we all may experience when we go in a highly polluted area is we might cough, we may have difficulty breathing. Reduced lung function has to do with how much you can breathe in and breathe out when you really try. Increased respiratory mortality. So this was a surprise for me, is how linked it was with cardiovascular disorders, including heart attack. I've never talked to anybody who said, well, they had a heart attack because the pollution was really high that day. But they may have had a heart attack because the pollution was very high that day. They just didn't know it. They didn't know that that was the factor that tipped the balance. So it will augment the development of atherosclerosis. Short-term increases in particulate matter have been associated with just all mortality due to cardiovascular disease, heart attacks. And this just shows a picture of a heart attack. Here, with a heart attack, in most cases, the atherosclerosis has triggered formation of a blood clot in the coronary blood vessel. Blood flow to an area of the heart is stopped, and a little bit, hopefully a little bit and not a lot, of the heart dies, and that's a myocardial infarction. That's most heart attacks, heart failure, strokes, arrhythmias, and it's principally among susceptible individuals. So, you know, a young, healthy person who visits China and is exposed to high levels of pollutants are unlikely to have a heart attack right then and there. But if you have heart disease, I probably wouldn't visit China or India. It could make the difference. And you'll notice it says elderly, so we're all in that susceptible population. Well, I don't think we're all over a certain age, I'll put it that way. So I think it's particularly important that we're just aware of this area. Long-term exposure is worse. It increases the risk of mortality more than short-term does. And it is estimated that it reduces life expectancy in the population by several years. And it's been shown that reductions can decrease cardiovascular mortality. So when COVID first happened, remember, everything shut down, and there were places in the world that you could see, like the Taj Mahal of India, that it was hard to see because of the pollution before. Industry shut down, traffic shut down, the air cleaned up immediately. And then I saw in the New York Times, there was real concern because people weren't showing, the heart attacks had gone way down. And they were real concerned that people were having heart attacks and staying at home and were scared to go to the hospital and all this. And a few people made the note, I remember in the comments section, said, air pollution is down. So we'll never know how much was people not showing up to the hospital. Well, at least we don't know now. How many weren't showing up to the hospital, and how much the cleaner air just had that effect. So this is from the American Heart Association. It is a scientific statement they made in 2010. And they said there is a causal relationship between particulate matter 2.5 exposure and cardiovascular mortality and morbidity, death and disease. And that, quote, it is a modifiable factor contributing to this. Now, the American Heart Association is saying this, but I don't hear doctors saying this to their patients. And I think it would be good if they did, because there are things we can do to protect ourselves from pollution. They proposed, again, that it was due to oxidative stress and inflammation, starting with the lungs, going to the rest of the body. They also, there was some research that said that there was increased fight or flight activity with high pollutants. I know for me, if I'm having trouble breathing, my heart rate's gonna go up just because it's disconcerting. That will cause high blood pressure and can lead to heart arrhythmias. And they suggested that it's possible that the particulates, small particulates that get into the bloodstream, may be causing damage directly. Cancer. So for this, I went to a monograph by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And they concluded, this is associated with the World Health Organization. They just got, again, researchers in the area, experts, to come to a consensus. And they said there's sufficient evidence in humans for the carcinogenicity of outdoor air pollution. No doubt about it, lung cancer. I mean, it's just very clearly a risk factor for lung cancer. There's some other cancers that it's been associated with, and keep in mind, every cancer is a separate disease. So lung cancer has different risk factors than kidney cancer, et cetera, or breast cancer. In some ways, they're separate diseases. These are diseases that have been associated with air pollution, but further research is needed before this group will come to a consensus and say there's a causal factor. My first husband died of bladder cancer, and I believe that working at US Steel and coming home with his car covered with dust may have been a factor. I think it was. So cancer occurs when there's been a number of mutations in certain genes. And remember that air pollution causes oxidative stress, and oxidative stress will cause DNA damage. And the result is uncontrolled cell division, and that is what cancer is. So what I wanted to say about this is that at this point in time, we can say definitively lung cancer, probably these other cancers, but we can't rule out any of the other cancers. I know there's research going on that I've read about looking at breast cancer. It causes DNA damage. Whether or not we can uncover a linkage, epidemiological research can be very difficult to do. Doesn't mean that there's not an effect. So I would never say that air pollution does not cause this cancer. We just don't know. So emerging adverse effects, there's been a lot of research in the last 10 years on neurological effects and air pollution. It can delay cognitive development. It can be a factor in dementia. I have a slide on Alzheimer's, as well as there's evidence about type 2 diabetes and obesity and low birth weight. So Alzheimer's disease. I don't know about y'all, but that is one of the real concerns of my life. One reason I'm learning Spanish is to try to keep my brain active. And there is a link between air pollution and the incidence of Alzheimer's. And it looks like those who are genetically susceptible to it, have this particular gene, are just particularly susceptible to the effect of air pollution. So there's been some work done with human research regarding people who lived in very, very polluted places. So I've heard about this research that was done from people who died in Mexico City. And Mexico City is one of the most polluted cities in the world. And these highly exposed individuals, their brain on autopsy showed neuroinflammation, oxidative stress, and markers for Alzheimer's, beta amyloid. COVID's been on our mind. And we would have thought that air pollution would make it worse if no studies were done on it. Why? Because it increases the rate of respiratory infections and the increases it. There are studies that showed that it increased susceptibility to the first SARS virus. And it increases cardiovascular disease and comorbidities for COVID. Now, there were studies that were done that they're called ecological studies, that they showed that in areas that were highly polluted, there was a higher level of COVID deaths. Now, with this kind of study, you know, it could have been this area had older people. It could have been this area had a population with a lot of smokers. It's suggestive, but it's not that definitive. But now we have some definitive studies. These were two studies that I read about that were able to get the individual data. Does this person who died from COVID, did they smoke? What was their age? And factor that in. And when they did that, they still saw the association. I read one abstract where they didn't find an association, but their numbers were very small. So because air pollution increases the risk, usually around 10 to 20%, that's a relatively small risk. And to detect it, you have to have a lot of subjects before you can uncover that effect. And this particular study did not. But the studies that have a lot of people usually have, for the most part, have found this association. So it impairs host immunity. It activates certain enzymes that allow the virus to get in. And I found this very interesting. It increases, air pollution increases the synthesis of this molecule that's needed for the virus to get in the cells, called ACE2. This is from the European Respiratory Society. You can see it causes a lot of problems, I liked this study because it's a human study, and it's an experiment. Well, it's an association, but it really mimics an experiment. So what was done is the researchers took young, healthy medical students in Beijing, where the Summer Olympics were a number of years ago. And so none of these participants were healthy. And they look at the fractional exhaled nitric oxide, which apparently is an indication of pulmonary inflammation. So very simple experiment, and they got the parts per million. And before the Beijing Olympics, when Beijing was at its usual highly polluted place, this was the mean, was 13.14. Well, they shut everything down for the Olympics. The industry, the traffic, et cetera, the air really improved. And so when they healthy people during that time. You see it the average decreased by half. And then it went back to business as usual, and they looked at it and it had popped up. So these weren't people who were sick, but they did have levels of pulmonary inflammation that could indicate that problems were on the way. Climate change. We're also interested in climate change. How is it effective? Well, first of all, the heat will increase ozone. When I see these fires in the West, it just makes my heart sink, because smoke is particulates. It doesn't have to be from a man-made. Smoke is a particulate, and these fires are causing particulate pollution. It's interesting, or rather something that's worth noting, is that the steps we take to reduce air pollution will reduce climate change. Not perfect. I know diesel cars use less gas, but diesel is terrible as far as pollution. So what can we do about it? I am a proud member of the Greater Birmingham Alliance to Stop Pollution. We work with others for change. We can advocate for science-based environmental standards and regulations. And I don't know about y'all, but since I've retired, oh my goodness, I am on my phone all the time with my legislators and people who have a role in this. We can advocate for strict enforcement of existing regulations, and our Birmingham has had some people some industries who have not followed the law. And we can advocate for the increased use of renewable energy sources. I remember asking I did talk on this several years ago after I'd retired, to some of my former students at Talladega College. And I said, what's the main thing you can do? And they kind of looked at me, and I said, vote for people who put our clean air at a high priority. This just has to do, y'all. I've been focused on particulate matter. Benzene should not be in our air. It's a volatile organic compound. Most of the research has been done on occupational exposures. It causes leukemia. It's very bad. But the people in Tarrant have been exposed to it because of ABC Coke in Tarrant, part of Drummond, and they were found guilty, and there was a bribery scandal. So, just because something's not pollutant, it doesn't mean it's not regulated and that it's not harmful. This particular one is terrible. So what can we do in our daily lives to make a difference? Use renewable sources whenever possible. We can't do solar because we have so many trees. So we get our power through Arcadia, which facilitates the use of renewable sources. Improve the energy efficiency of your home so you don't have to use so much gas in the winter or air conditioning in the summer. And my husband Dick and I have a lot of improvement in this area. We could do a lot more than we're doing. Reduce gas consumption, drive fuel efficient vehicles. I've had a Prius since 2002 or 3. And I love it. I love them. And Dick has an electric vehicle now. So we highly recommend these fuel efficient vehicles. We can support improved public transportation here in Birmingham. Lots of room for improvement. I think van programs by employers such as UAB would be a nice perk for their employees and would help get some cars off the road. Protecting ourselves, find out what the air pollution is for that day. So if I had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or had a heart attack, I'd have an air filtration device in my home, or make sure that the air conditioning system was very efficient in removing pollutants, and check the forecast on days that it's a high risk. Wear a mask. I mean, we're so used to wearing masks now, it shouldn't be any problem. But that's one reason I wanted to do this, is because there are things we can do to protect ourselves and to help our planet. It doesn't have to be just a tale of woe and gloom and doom. There are things we can do. There's been research on what's better, to not exercise or exercise when it's polluted, when there's a lot of pollution. And what I've read mostly is, yeah, you need to exercise, but maybe not outdoors when it's highly polluted, or maybe if you do it outdoors, walk, don't run. So this is from the World Health Federation to kind of close up, that says that worldwide, and they're including probably household air pollution as well. 29% of deaths from lung cancer have a component of air pollution that it has caused it. So it's a contributing factor. From 24% from strokes, 25% from heart disease, and 43% from lung disease. And then I have my citations for anybody who is interested. You can email me it's just my name, Marion Fintel @gmail.com, and I can give you more information. Just as an aside, if you're ever wanting to look at the journal articles for a particular disease, if you go to PubMed Central, you get free journals. If you go to, if they're not free, we're talking $30, $40, but free journals at PubMed Central on any health issue you can think of. And that is it. I have some additional slides just for questions. Okay, so if everybody will unmute themselves, if you have questions, comments, this is our time for a discussion.
How about air purifiers for your home? Do they really do anything?
I think so. I think so. This was suggested by, one of the sources of I know I went to the American Lung Association. I went to a bunch of websites as well as going to journal articles. And it was one of their recommendations. So it wasn't one of mine. Now the van, that's one of mine. And I suggested the use of employer-owned vans because of my experience in California. I had a coworker who lived in Simi Valley, which was far away. Well, she took the van every day to UCLA and back, and that took cars off the street. It was great for her. It's just a nice perk, and I think a place like UAB would be perfect for it, with people coming from far distances. And it won't work for the professors or the doctors because they don't know when they're going to get off, and they don't know when they need to start. They do know. My day starts at this time, my day ends at that time. And I think it would be a nice perk for them. So any other comments or questions?
What about air conditioning filters?
Yeah, what the source said was that if a really good air conditioning system can be helpful. So
they have these highly efficient filters that take out more of the smaller particles. That's what I'm asking about. But they're more.
I would get it. I would get it.
I think,
So I can't give you figures. All I can say is it's what one of the websites I went to recommended. And like I said, I think it's the American Lung Association.
I'd like to comment on your comments. I don't think from any of the statistical studies or people's impressions or what seems to be likely that you can make any causal association, a causal statement from any statistics, even if it's statistically significant, because you can have things that are statistically significant but biologically unimportant. And when you have to go to studies that take 100,000 or 200,000 people in order to make statistical significance, you then enter into a problem where the physician who is facing a patient has an N of 1, and he doesn't know or she doesn't know what where that patient is in the risk. In the risk, you can only say, certain things. What you really have to say, and since everybody breathes and everybody eats and everybody's exposed to various stressors, that air pollution, which is not good, contributes as a contributor along with multiple other factors to coronary disease, diabetes, and any other disease that you've outlined there. You can't just point to one thing. We're not a we don't live in a monovariate world. We live in a multivariate world.
I have some additional information. So appreciate your comment. First of all, I do disagree. I think in the case of air pollution, the American Heart Association study group did say word for word that they thought that there was a causal relationship. Now, does that mean a young, healthy person will go to Peking and have a heart attack? Absolutely not. One of the things and I'm going to get this slide. So you're absolutely right when you say that what you can say is a contributing factor. But a contributing factor can be a causal factor. So in epidemiology, we talk about causal pies. And there are, for any disease, even measles, you're going to have more than one factor. You're going to have the virus. You're going to have you'll have the virus. You'll have the person's immune system. You'll have a number of factors. I looked for cardiovascular disease and I didn't see it online, but we all know what they are: atherosclerosis, genes, diet, exercise, smoking. All of those are huge factors as far as cardiovascular disease goes. Air pollution is not a huge factor. It causes the risk that the increased risk is certainly less than the increased risk from smoking. But it could be the piece that completes the pie. And even though it is a small effect compared to some other risk factors, because everybody in the world is exposed to it, it is having a large effect. So I think you can say it is a causal factor. It's not the only causal factor for these disorders. As you say, it is a contributing factor. But it would be wrong to say it's only associated with it, because there's too much other evidence. That's why I went through the Bradford Hill criteria. There's animal studies. I showed you that human study that showed the increase in a marker for inflammation. There's biomarker studies. There's studies where they expose people to air from a freeway air for a short period of time and looked at the changes that occurred. So I do use the word causal. And so does the American Heart Association and the World Health Organization and the American Thoracic Society, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll disagree with you on that. But it is a contributing factor, of course. This just shows a causal pie for the cold. And in order to get you see weak immune system, et cetera. These are all factors that increase the risk. And depending for each individual, it'll be different how these pieces add up. But I can imagine someone having a pie for a for a heart attack, and they have the gene, they have the genes, they have the atherosclerosis, they have the poor diet, they have sedentary lifestyle, but they haven't had a heart attack yet. And then they go out and it's really polluted and they have a heart attack. So in that case, the air pollution was completing the pie. So I'm afraid we're just going to have to disagree on this one.
I was in Los Angeles by chance on a family road trip in 1954, and my cousin out there lived near a schoolyard, and we went to play basketball. And it took 2 breaths for me to realize this is going to be impossible. It hurt, and I got short of breath, and that game was over.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to whether or not retrospective epidemiological studies have shown increased death rates to diseases that you've mentioned in the Los Angeles area compared to other metro areas which had lower pollution. And secondly, why is Holland better off than we are as far as the mortality rates?
That look at people from different people who live in a highly polluted area versus people who live in an area and everything in between. And I'm sure that includes areas of Los Angeles. Now, I don't know, I have not read, I'm sure they're there, but I personally have not read studies that say, the Los Angeles, Alabama. But I would say that they're included in a lot of studies that I've listed in my citations. So again, if anybody wants to look at those papers, just send me an email with my name at gmail.com, one word. I know when I lived in Los Angeles in the 1980s, I never saw blue sky. I was so happy when I moved to Alabama and I could see blue sky again. It was always hazy. It always looked foggy. Well, my sister and her husband and my niece live in Los Angeles. So I've gone, and my daughter went to school at Scripps College in Claremont, California, near Los Angeles. And I've gone back there many times since I left, and the sky's blue now. It's better. It's not good, but it is better. And it's better because they have strict pollution controls on their cars. And so even though they have more people, the pollution is better. But I was on the EPA website this morning, and I guess I was happy to learn that at this present time, there's no place in Alabama that is not in accord with the standards for these criteria pollutants, particulate matter, lead, ozone, et cetera. We're in attainment. We are, our average is below that. California, oh my goodness, they still have some work to do. They had lots of non-attainment areas, which means they have to have a plan. the local governments and the state government have to have a plan to clean up their air. But we didn't have any non-attainment areas. However, we have, even though, you know, when I looked at the Air Now website this morning and it said the Birmingham area was good, that doesn't mean that it's good in North Birmingham. That doesn't mean it's good in Terrence. So there'll be pockets because of nearby industry that are not good at all. It just means that the average is good. So I think you did the right thing when you saw that you were having trouble breathing to get inside. That is, and that's why I wanted to do this presentation and to y'all and to other people, because I didn't know this stuff before I started reading these articles. It really, I was shocked at how important this is. So I think it's good for us to be aware of it.
What what's the effect of the war in Ukraine on air quality around the world?
That is an excellent question. And I'm afraid I don't know the answer. It makes sense that the air quality was the worst in Europe to start off with in Ukraine. Power plants. But it just makes sense when you have an explosion and you have all that smoke. And that's why we'll never eliminate particulate matter, because fires give off particulates. They'll always be there. But reducing it makes a lot of sense. But I can imagine my guess is it's terrible.
There's an article in the New York Times yesterday, I think, that said that it was an ecological disaster.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I missed that. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm gonna go find that article.
What are the chances you think that they will be able to implement the new standards? It seems to me that industry and big business has a much more effective lobby. And obviously they had cooperation during the Trump times, and the government may be able to change something, but that doesn't, just because they change it doesn't mean it actually goes into effect. What are the chances you think if they do change it, it actually will come to pass?
Oh, I think if they change it, and it's law, it's the official regulation. Air is monitored. There are monitors. You can go on the EPA website and see the monitors in this area. And when there is non-attainment, so right now we're in attainment, say they lower it and suddenly in Birmingham, we're not in attainment because of our industry. So the local government has to have a plan, and they have to, and the state government, and they present it with how they are going to reduce it. And so I do think it would make a difference. I think it would make a difference. Have to balance
Not only
industry and economy with health. There's always going to have to be a balance of that.
Not only do
So
they
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, not only do they have to have a plan, but they also have limitations. They can't bring in new industries. They can't develop until they have that plan, because without it, they'll be out of compliance.
Right. Absolutely.
So that limits our growth.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So, and so for that reason, I wouldn't expect them to go as low as World Health Organization. So right now it's at 12. World Health Organization is urging, they have intervening steps, but their goal is 5. And I don't see us going down that low, but I could see us going from 12 to. We'll just have to see. Again, they're going to make their proposal this summer. And the evidence is so overwhelming that particulate matter below 12 is causing problems that I would be amazed if it isn't lowered.
Don't we all have microplastics in our blood now?
Probably do. That would be from the water though, and not the air pollution. So I'm not familiar with that area.
Well, it seems to me if it's in the air, it will also dissipate into our water. So
Oh,
whatever
that's very true.
floating around out there is going to eventually settle in the water.
That is a very good point. And I know where they had such, there's been such problems as far as the ABC Coke plant and pollution. The soil is contaminated. And how did it get contaminated? I'm sure it's from the air. But you know, that's another reason to just be aware of the dangers of pollutant. If I lived there, I'd first of all have a really good filtration system. And I'm a gardener, but I wouldn't plant things in the ground. I would have lots of pots with soil that I bought from the store. So it's just good to be, in my opinion, it's good to be aware of this.
All right, are there any more questions? Kathy?
No, okay, I think it's after 11, and I think it may be time to say thank you very much and sign off.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marion.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.